The late 1990s were a dangerous time to build a game console. Sony had turned gaming into pop culture, Nintendo still had Mario, and Sega was carrying the financial scars of the Saturn. But on September 9, 1999, the Dreamcast arrived in North America like a machine from the future. Online gaming. Arcade-perfect graphics, a tiny screen inside the memory card. It had everything Sega needed for one final comeback. It also had a hidden door. Once hackers found it, copied games could run from an ordinary CDR with no mod chip, and, eventually, no special boot disk. You could download a game, burn it on the family computer, place it inside the console, and watch Sega's own security system wave it through. But the Flaw was not designed for games, piracy, or hackers. It was created for music. And the reason that forgotten feature became so destructive reveals that Sega's real problem was much larger than one security mistake. To understand why, you have to go back to the Saturn. Launched in Japan in November 1994, the Saturn was powerful, complicated, and notoriously difficult to develop for. It used two Hitachi SH2 CPUs, multiple video processors, and an architecture that could produce incredible results if a studio had enough time, money, and possibly several exhausted programmers sleeping beneath their desks. But Sony's PlayStation was cheaper, easier to develop for, and brilliantly marketed. Sega also damaged the Saturn's American launch by releasing it 4 months early in May 1995, surprising retailers and developers who were not ready. 3 million units worldwide. The PlayStation passed 102 million. So Sega's next console had to be cheaper, simpler, and developer-friendly. No more engineering spaghetti. No more confusing customers with add-ons. No more surprise launches. This time, Sega wanted to get everything right. Development began under the codename Katana. The final machine used a 200 MHz Hitachi SH4 CPU, a PowerVR2 graphics chip, 16 MB of main RAM, and 8 MB of video RAM. Those numbers sound adorable now. Your smartwatch could probably bully it. But in 1998, the Dreamcast produced clean textures, smooth animation, and bright arcade visuals that made the Nintendo 64 and original PlayStation suddenly look tired. Japan got the console on November 27, 1998, but manufacturing problems caused shortages. North America followed on the legendary 9999 launch with a price of $199 and 18 launch games. Sega sold more than 225,000 systems in the first 24 hours. Within 2 weeks, that number reached around 500,000. For a moment, the comeback was real. Soul Calibur looked almost impossibly good. Sonic Adventure gave Sega's mascot a proper 3D world, complete with whales, collapsing bridges, and a camera that occasionally behaved like it had been drinking. NFL 2K challenged Madden. Crazy Taxi turned reckless driving and punk rock into pure arcade joy. The console even included a built-in modem, so games like Phantasy Star Online could connect players across real phone lines while someone in the house shouted at you to get off the internet. Do you remember that sound? The modem screeching like two robots arguing inside a fax machine. That noise meant the future was arriving, very slowly. But Sega's most consequential choice was hidden beneath the games themselves. Normal compact discs stored about 650 to 700 megabytes. Sega wanted more capacity, but DVD technology would have increased costs. So Sega partnered with Yamaha to create the GD-ROM, or Gigabyte Disk Read-Only Memory. It could hold roughly 1 gigabyte of data, giving developers extra space while making Dreamcast games difficult for ordinary computers to read. It looked elegant, more storage than CD, lower cost than DVD, and a proprietary format pirates could not simply duplicate with a standard burner. But Sega wanted the Dreamcast to be more than a game console. Games, internet, music, multimedia. One machine under your television, glowing orange and ready for the new millennium. So Sega added compatibility with MIL-CD, an enhanced music format that could combine audio with menus, images, and interactive software. Put one into a Dreamcast, and the console could load the additional code stored on it. Almost nobody cared. Only a handful of official MIL-CD releases appeared. It became one of those formats that sounded futuristic in a boardroom but remained invisible inside actual homes. Yet the Dreamcast's boot ROM still had to recognize it. That second question was the hidden door. Hackers discovered that code stored inside a specially prepared CD session could use the MIL-CD boot process. The Dreamcast would treat the disc as legitimate multimedia software, but that software could redirect the machine toward unauthorized game code. The console was not reading a copied GD-ROM. It was being persuaded to launch something else through a feature Sega had deliberately installed. In June 2000, a group called Utopia released the Dreamcast Boot CD. Its screen showed a rotating reindeer, because apparently the gateway to mass console piracy needed festive wildlife. You inserted the Utopia disc, waited for it to load, swapped in a copied game, and the Dreamcast ran it. But swapping discs was still slightly annoying, so piracy groups removed even that obstacle. Self-booting releases began using the exploit directly. No boot disc, no soldering iron, no mod chip. The player needed only a Dreamcast, a computer with a CD burner, and a blank disc. You just burned the game. A GD-ROM held roughly 1 gigabyte, while most CDRs held only 650 or 700 megabytes, but that became a file size puzzle rather than a real barrier. Piracy groups compressed files, reduced audio quality, removed videos, or cut unused content. Some releases lost music or cinematics. Others were optimized so well that the average player noticed almost nothing. Sega had protected the front gate, but pirates had found a side entrance and learned how to move the furniture through it. Worse, the timing was almost perfect. By 2000, CD burners were becoming affordable, broadband was spreading, and game files were moving through IRC channels, FTP servers, and early file-sharing networks. One copied disc became an upload. That upload became thousands of downloads. Those downloads became stacks of handwritten CDRs in bedrooms, dorm rooms, flea markets, and independent game shops. Silver tops, black marker. A game title spelled slightly wrong. Sometimes it did. Sometimes the intro was corrupted and the music sounded like it was being played through a toaster, but free is an extremely persuasive price. Still, blaming the Dreamcast's death on piracy alone creates a neat story where none exists. Sega's actual situation was much more dangerous, because the exploit did not strike a healthy company. It struck a company that could no longer absorb another mistake. Sega had lost enormous amounts of money during the Saturn years. Consumer trust had been damaged by the Sega CD, 32X, Saturn, and years of hardware appearing and disappearing. Electronic Arts refused to support Dreamcast, weakening its sports lineup despite the excellent 2K series. Then Sony introduced something Sega could not match. When the PlayStation 2 launched in Japan on March 4, 2000, it sold roughly 980,000 units in a single day. It had the PlayStation name, stronger third-party support, and DVD playback at a time when dedicated DVD players were still expensive. So the Dreamcast was no longer competing only against another game console. It was competing against the machine many families wanted for their living room anyway. Sega responded with price cuts, but cheaper hardware created a trap. Consoles were sold on thin margins, sometimes at a loss, because the manufacturer expected to recover that money through game royalties. Every Dreamcast was supposed to create years of software sales. But an easily pirated Dreamcast could do the opposite. Someone could buy the discounted hardware, burn the most popular games, and cost Sega more money the longer they used it. The company gained a user, but not the revenue that user was supposed to generate. That is why the exploit mattered far beyond the number of copied discs. Publishers saw an installed base of only around 9 million systems, rising competition from PlayStation 2, Xbox, and GameCube, and a platform that could run pirated software without physical modification. So investing millions in a major Dreamcast release became harder to justify. Fewer releases made the console less attractive. Weaker software sales forced deeper hardware discounts. Those discounts increased Sega's dependence on royalties, but piracy weakened those royalties further. The hidden door had become a feedback loop. Sega removed mil-CD compatibility from some later Dreamcast revisions, but millions of vulnerable consoles were already in homes. Self-booting releases were circulating globally, and the Dreamcast's reputation as an easy piracy machine could not be recalled like defective hardware. On January 31, 2001, Sega announced that Dreamcast production would end. Manufacturing stopped in March, less than 2 years after the North American launch. Lifetime sales reached only about 9.13 million units. But here is the larger revelation. Sega did not fail to protect its games, because GD-ROM encryption was easily defeated. The proprietary game discs were never truly duplicated. Instead, the Dreamcast bypassed its own protected format, because Sega had tried to save money while turning the console into an all-purpose multimedia machine. The obscure feature almost nobody used became more important than the security system Sega had built specifically for games. That is the cruelest kind of engineering failure. Not when a machine does something it was never meant to do, but when two reasonable decisions combine into something catastrophic. GD-ROM kept costs down. Mil-CD expanded the console's multimedia appeal. But together, they created a protected platform with an unprotected path directly into it. And yet, the final twist is that the same path gave the Dreamcast an afterlife Sega could never have planned. Because the console could run unauthorized code, independent developers, homebrew creators, emulator builders, and preservation communities gained access to the hardware. Long after Sega stopped manufacturing it, new Dreamcast games continued appearing. Fans rebuilt online services and created private servers for games whose official networks had vanished. A Flaw helped shorten the Dreamcast's commercial life, but it also extended its cultural life. That does not excuse piracy, and no honest historian can calculate exactly how many Dreamcasts mill CD killed. Sega was already trapped between old financial wounds and a PlayStation 2-shaped freight train, but when survival depended on every game sold, Sega had accidentally built a console that could bypass the business model keeping it alive. The Dreamcast lasted barely 28 months in North America, but its influence is everywhere. Built-in online play, downloadable content, console web browsing, voice chat, and digital arcade experiences. Sega lost the hardware war, but many of its ideas quietly won the future. Maybe that is why the Dreamcast still feels special. It was brilliant enough to show us tomorrow, vulnerable enough to lose it, and loved enough that people refused to let it disappear. What do you remember most? The games you bought? The discs you burned? Or that beautiful orange swirl appearing on the screen? Share your Dreamcast story below, and if you enjoy uncovering the strange decisions that shaped gaming history, like the video and subscribe. You'll be glad you did.